We ask the question, who are we? What we know is that we're made of quantum energy. You all have heard that we are quantum energy, yes? Okay. For 70 years, scientists have been telling us that we are little particles of quantum energy. And now we believe them. But now scientists say those little quantum particles can do miraculous things, amazing things. But the scientists say those miracles have nothing to do with your life. For example, quantum particles, we know, can exist as a physical particle, like this. It's a quantum particle. That particle can exist invisible. The particle is still there. It has just changed its form. Quantum particles can exist in one place in a moment in time. Quantum particles can exist in two places or many places at the same time, and they are always connected. They are always connected with one another.
If there's no signal, there's no behavior. So it's like reflex, stimulus, response. The signal is the stimulus, and then the cell creates a response. So basically it goes like this. The receptor is the input. It reads the environment. The receptor then connects to the effector, which generates the behavior through a secondary signal. The primary signal, this is the secondary signal that activates the behavior of the cell. So that this unit is controlling a specific aspect of behavior. But there's like thousands of these different kinds of units simultaneously. So this is an example of just a switch. It's a switch. When insulin shows up, switch on metabolism. When histamine shows up, switch on protection. So there's for each different thing that's out in the environment, there's a switch that will activate the behavior of the cell.
So the particles are always connected. Quantum particles can communicate with themselves in the past and in the future. This is very interesting. Scientists can take a quantum particle and they know everything there is to know about this particle. They know its rotation, its plus, its minus, its charge in the present, now. Okay? They can take it into the future, and now this is the past, this is the future. Okay, you okay so far? All right, now, they can change the particle now, and it changes what it had to be in the past to get to now. They can change the particle in the present, and it changes the particle in the past, even though the past already happened.
Well, then look at it this way. The function of the receptor is awareness of the environment, right? It sees. But I have to convert that signal into a biological action. So the function of the output guy, the effector, is to create a physical sensation or response to that signal. Is that understandable so far? Why is this important? Go back and ask, the first step is this. What does this do? What does it do? It controls a typical behavior in response to the signal. Well, what is this called? Well, it represents awareness of the environment through physical sensation. So what is this control unit actually called? Perception. Perception, awareness of the environment through physical sensation. So if I go back a second, I say, what is the function of this? And the answer is this. It's perception. It sees the environment and activates a behavior. There's no DNA involved. There's no genes involved. All we're talking about is stimulus response. Stimulus comes in the receptor, response made by the effector.
So the question is, we're made of those particles. So can we do what these particles can do? We're made of quantum particles. Are they showing us our limits, or are they showing us our possibility, our potential? What do you think? Are those quantum particles that we're made of showing us limitations or possibilities? I think so. I think so. And I think you'll see why in just a moment. Can we do everything that those particles can do? The answer is yes. But it's based on what we believe to be true. Not what we think in our minds. What we believe in our hearts. And that is a very subtle, very powerful difference. Not the mind, the heart.
So the point about it is this simple first conclusion. It's very basic. Behavior, which is movement, this is behavior. Movement of protein is controlled by the signal, but via perception. So the bottom line is this. Perception controls behavior. If there is no perception, there's no behavior.
We're made of those particles. We are held together through a focus, a force. This is a clue. What is the force that holds our quantum particles together as our bodies? What is the force that begins with the letter C that holds all of the particles of your body together? What is that force called? Anyone? Consciousness. Very good. Consciousness is what holds these particles together. Consciousness organizes the particles into your body and into this world.
So let's just see how this actually works. So basically, here are proteins in the cell. Let's say that these proteins carry out a specific function, respiration or digestion. We call it a pathway. So let's say it's a muscle contraction. That these proteins, when activated, what activates the protein? The signal activates the protein. So what we're going to do is convert an environmental signal using the receptor and the effector. And this time I'm using an enzyme. Okay? And what I'm going to show you is how the mechanism from the environment, the signal, well, here's my connector one. Remember the green guy? But now the signal comes, and when the signal from the environment binds to the receptor, it changes the shape or conformation of the receptor, which implies that the signal is there. So the protein informs the cell that something has happened. Now that that shape has changed, this processor protein, the green one, can bind to the shape because it wasn't able to bind before. It wasn't the right shape. It's like dominoes, one hitting the next. Now that the processor protein is bound to the receptor, it changes its shape and will conform to fit the enzyme. So one domino hits the next, hits the next. Now that this is connected, I activate the enzyme, and the enzyme is going to create a signal. Now here's the connection between my muscle of proteins and the receptor. This is the secondary signal. Remember, primary signal and secondary signal. Well, at first it's bound and covered up and inhibited because if there's no signal, I don't want it to do anything. But when the signal shows up, then I take the enzyme, split it, and the active component, now this is the active signal, can bind to the protein. And now I can activate this protein. And this is the behavior that's going to be expressed by the cell. And the question, of course, is, well, what really activated this protein? What was the original source? The answer is the primary signal at the environment was then relayed by the secondary signal to activate the behavior of the cell.
1944, the father of quantum theory, his name was Max Planck. Max Planck made this statement. He said, the stuff of our world does not exist the way we think it exists. Max Planck said, as a man who has devoted his whole life to the most clear-headed science, to the study of matter, I can tell you as a result of my research about the atoms this much. There is no matter as such. What he's saying is the stuff that we're made of does not exist the way we believe it exists.
Here's the environmental signal. Here's the receptor, the effector. That's the perception unit. Perception is now being started because it saw the environment, changed the shape, activates the enzyme. The enzyme is activated, breaks that molecule, the signal molecule. The signal molecule comes down, binds to the protein, and generates behavior. The bottom line was this. The behavior of the cell is not programmed. The behavior of the cell is continuously adjusting to whatever the signals are in the environment. So now I got another question to ask you. What happens if that environmental signal shows up, but I don't have the proteins necessary in the cell right now for that event? So when it shows up, it says, well, I can't make a response. I don't have the behavioral proteins. Where do we get the behavioral proteins? Now we bring the DNA back in. What's the role of the DNA? The DNA double helix actually is a blueprint of the protein. If I separate the helix into two separate strands, and you look at these are called bases, these are the steps of the double helix right here, the color sequence in the DNA codes for the sequence of the amino acids. So for every 3 bases, I can tell you which is the next amino acid. So the point is this, the plan of how to make a protein, a specific protein, is built into this DNA.
What we think is matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force. He said there's a force out there that holds everything together in our bodies and in our world. He said we must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious mind, an intelligent mind. He said this mind is the matrix of all matter. This mind is the matrix of all matter.
DNA is a blueprint for the protein. Okay? That's all it is. It doesn't have any action except when I need it. So how do I activate the gene? Well, you heard of cancer genes? And you say, what is that, a gene that gives you cancer? And the answer is, here's a simple truth. Genes do not self-activate. That's biochemically a truth, meaning a gene cannot turn itself on and a gene cannot turn itself off. If you want a gene to be active, it's not up to the gene. So the concept that there's a cancer gene is a false concept, meaning this. If the gene really caused cancer and you were in possession of that gene, when would you express the cancer? You would express it by the time you were born, because as soon as the cells started to divide, the cancer gene would say, okay, time to make cancer. So how can you have so-called cancer gene for 30 or 40 years sitting in your body and you don't have cancer, and then you get cancer? Should I go back and say the gene caused that? And the answer is no.